introduce you to Bruce. Bruce is, if not the biggest buyer of Alaska, and handles 26 liquor stores out there, and I'm sure you can add more to it now that you are part of a bigger umbrella. So we're going to really talk about, this is a classic example of a perfect buyer who falls into a regional chain and a national chain as well. So the talk is really so practical that I think you're going to learn, different ways to work with a buyer like him. And we've boiled it down to 5 different ways, and Bruce is going to explain you what those definitions are and how you can approach him with these 5 different programs. Bruce, why don't you please give a little context about yourself and your work, and then we can go into those 5 things.
For sure. So as they mentioned, I'm the president of Elsun, and up in Alaska. We have 23 licenses up there, ranging from 1,500 square foot locations all the way up to 25,000. And I think more importantly for this talk, as Sid alluded to, I'm recently the president, but for the past 8 years before that, I was both the wine and spirit buyers. So I've worked with these different ways, worked with producers, with suppliers, with the distributors in these 5 different ways that we're going to be talking about. And I kind of wanted to offer some of my own personal experiences of what works, what doesn't, some of the anecdotes that I've experienced as a buyer, and hopefully some of you can take some of that to your own business and address some of the frustrations or opportunities that regional chains can maybe offer you. So the 5 that we're going to be talking about are, of course, the traditional model, which I think everyone is familiar with in this room of these particular models. The traditional model, of course, is working with the distributor. We have the clearance model, the private label model, control label, and what I call the exclusive label model, which is a little bit of a hybrid. So we all know the traditional model, and the traditional model is working with that distributor to take an existing brand that you then contract in with the distributor to sell in a market. And the advantages for a retailer like myself, or of course, pretty large with that, is the easiest way to go. For a supplier or importer or a producer, you have a built-in sales force. For me as a retailer, I don't have to inventory much of the product. I only need to keep it on my shelves. They'll deliver as needed to the stores. They'll help merchandise in some markets, in some states where it's illegal. They'll help provide point of sale for it. It's kind of the easy button when it comes to getting your product on the shelf of a chain retailer. It does have some downsides, though, as well, especially for medium and small suppliers. As we all know, there's been a lot of consolidation in the distributor market, which means that if you're a small or a medium-sized supplier, or you don't have a well-known product, it can be really, really tough to have those distributors give your brands the focus that they need to succeed in that market. And so I see that as a retailer as well, and I'm not going to point fingers at any distributors, but there's sometimes that even though I'm the largest wine buyer in the state, there's brands I'm never even presented with by the distributor because they're just not a priority for them, and they have so many other brands that they're juggling at the same time. So as we get further in, we'll talk about some of the other models and maybe why they're a better solution for your particular business. The second kind of way to work with a regional chain that I wanted to mention is the clearance model. And this is just a way to work with a regional chain where we're bypassing the distributor a little bit when you're long on product. Of course, there are chain retailers set up just to do this, to take product that you have a long vintage on, or that a SKU that's not moving as well as you'd like. Places like grocery outlet, where you kind of can talk directly to the retail buyer, bypass the distributor a little bit. Still legally, we need to use them, especially in a 3-tier state, so we follow all the laws. But oftentimes I see suppliers, producers, they'll get long on a vintage, and their solution with that is to lower the price to the distributor and hope the distributor begins to sell that out to a multitude of different accounts. Often it's easier to go to a chain retailer first and say, hey, I've got 10,000 cases or 5,000 cases or 1,000 cases of this, whatever the case may be, and I'd like to cut a deal directly with you for you to take the entire thing. It's a much easier way for you to get rid of that product quickly, and hopefully before, of course, it gets to the point where it becomes unsellable. This also works at a smaller scale as well. One thing that I've had a lot of success with in recent years, as we know, a lot of tasting rooms across the country were shut down during the pandemic. So what we've done is we've gone to some of these wineries, we've approached them and said, hey, do you have any winery-only wines that you now have some long vintages on because you weren't able to do those cellar door sales in the 2020, 2021, beginning of 2022? And we've been able to take those winery-only wines off their hands that were just kind of collecting dust for them. It gets us a product that no one else has in the market that we can offer at a great price. The winery sells through the product, those winery-only wines, and everybody is happy. They don't have to worry about taking what used to be a winery-only SKU and then sending it through the distribution network and just hoping that the distributor finds enough restaurants and independents to clear through this inventory for them. Instead, it already has a home in that chain. The next way to work with a regional chain, of course, is private label, something that I think a lot of people in this room are very, very familiar with. So I want to talk a little bit more about what it's like to work with a private label as a regional chain. As we know, private label is when we are working with a chain, with a restaurant chain, with a retailer chain to create something that's just going to be sold by them, whether that's be wine, spirits, or beer. As a mid-size regional chain, private label can be daunting for a chain like my own. We're very, very big in Alaska, but as you know, Alaska is a very, very small state by population. So meeting a lot of those minimums that private label producers have can be really challenging for us, especially now where I think all retailers are being a little bit more careful with how much inventory they have on hand and their inventory turns. It's more challenging for me to talk to a private label producer that says, you need to take 2,000 cases right up front, and I look at that, and on that particular SKU, well, I estimate that could be a couple years of inventory. That's a really tough sell for me. So working that way with private label can be a little bit daunting. The other issue with private label, and I'm just going to be frank about it, but I think this is changing in recent years, is there often has been a quality issue as well. We do a really, really great job selling the first bottle of that product to a consumer. We get the label right, we get, it's approachable, but they take it home, and because it's approachable, it also sometimes can be a little bit forgettable. And we're not necessarily building a brand. We sell through that first order, that second order can be a little bit tougher. I think in recent years, as a couple presentations ago, they were talking about the higher quality fruit that's available for private label. I do think that's changing, and I see it myself in the market. The quality of private label you can get now compared to 10 years ago is much, much better. So that's coming around a little bit. I'm really optimistic on what that can mean for chains like my own. But when we talk about the issue of minimums, that's where we kind of have to talk about control label, because control label brands, of course, solve that issue for chains like mine. For those of you that don't know what control label is, and like I said, most of you probably in this room already do, but a control label is a brand that can be exclusive for multiple chains at once, because those control label brands are sold to those individual chains in non-competing markets. For myself, if ABC has a brand exclusively, it doesn't bother me at all because they're in Florida. If Specs does, they're in Texas, doesn't bother me. So I can be exclusive on that same brand in Alaska. We can all enjoy the elevated margins that you get with the private label item. We don't have to worry about the minimums that we do because we're sharing that minimum among multiple retailers, and that control brand can be a really positive thing for us. And we do a lot of control brand business in Alaska with some of those brands that we share among other retailers. There's also, I think, a big opportunity sometimes to take a private label that you're already working with another chain on that they've done and just ask them, hey, do you mind if we take this somewhere else as well and sell it in? A lot of the control labels that have been most successful for us are ones that started off as a private label for another chain, and we just had the supplier or producer ask the question, hey, do you mind if we grab 400 cases of this a year to sell into this chain in Alaska? And a lot of times the answer is yes. Most efficient way, of course, to go to market for you with a control label is to find a group of retailers that are already working with private labels, such as the Alliance Group, which has about 20 different retailers or more across the country that are all in non-competing markets. You place an item with the Alliance Group, and all of a sudden you have access to all of those regional chains all at once that are, again, non-competing, so they can all have that exclusivity in those individual markets. The final thing or model that I kind of wanted to talk about is exclusive label, which is very similar to control, but it's kind of a hybrid between the traditional model and the control label model. And it's something that we have a lot of success with at our chain. And the kind of premise behind that is that just because you have a national brand or one that's being represented with the regular distributor model, the traditional model in other states, doesn't mean that that brand has to be sold the same way across the entire market. So what we find oftentimes that there is a brand that's being sold in the traditional model, but it's not represented in our market. So we call them up and say, hey, I know that you maybe don't have the capacity to go full market interstate. Maybe you don't feel you're going to get the representation with the distributor that you need interstate. Or maybe there's another reason that you don't really want to do that expansion. And we say, let us take you as a regional chain exclusively in our market. We get an exclusive of a national brand, which is usually great quality. Sometimes it has great accolades as well. We work with a lot of really, really respected wineries this way. We get to work with it as a control label in our state. The supplier doesn't have to worry about a distributor contract. It still needs to go through a distributor, of course, to satisfy the 3-tier system. But because we're taking all of the product at once, and because the distributor doesn't have to merchandise it, we can usually get it at a pass-through rate, which means that I can sell the product at MSRP nationally, take a richer margin on it like it was private label or a control brand, and the supplier is, of course, making the same amount of money as they would selling it to a distributor. So it's a model that works really, really well for us. We've actually worked with a lot of suppliers that have been pulling out of our market saying, hey, we can't get the representation we need at these distributors. We're only selling a handful of cases a year. We approach them, we say, before you pull out, why don't we take this brand exclusively just for our chain? We'll make it a priority because we're gonna make a higher margin on it going through this model. And we're gonna sell a whole lot more of this product just in our chain, having it be a priority than the distributor was doing for you full market. And we've done that with a lot of really respected brands in the Alaskan market. And it's something that as a small or medium supplier, if you have a product that you know is going to be good, but you don't think that the distributor is going to give you the attention that you need in a new market, going in that regional chain may be a good solution for you.
Solid. We're going to have some questions out here as well, so just start thinking, please, and I'll ask you one question in the meantime.
Sure.
I see this. If I was a supplier, I would make myself 5 different SKUs and have a strategy to grow my relationship with you, right? And it can include the 4. Obviously, I don't want to be the clearance, but in case you will shoot my friend and you'll help me in case the bad day comes, right? So I would definitely have 4 different SKUs positioned for the doors, and I would start growing that. So how have you seen people starting with 1 and then slowly going to the traditional or the other way around, and having 4 or 5 SKUs with different models in your store?
For sure. Yeah, there are suppliers that we work with that have some of their product sold traditional model, and then some of their models sold control label, or some of their models sold traditional, and then some essentially as exclusives. They're not made as a control label, but we have them as exclusives in our particular market. And so there can be quite a bit of overlap there. And like I said, there's a lot of opportunity for existing private labels to be control labels in other markets where the chain that they were made for doesn't operate.
So I think it's a great way, maybe you can double down on this, on a strategy where I can start with you on an exclusive or a control label where you have to do less, but I'm still giving you the benefits of it. And then as we start building a relation, I'll say, all right, introduce me to a couple of distributors for my main SKU. And then can you just put that on the shelf, not the floor stack, but can we get started, right? So
for sure, and that's something that, just that scenario is something that we've done before. We certainly don't want the stuff that we were exclusive with before to go full market sometimes, though we usually find, because we're a retailer, for it to go to the on-premise market. That doesn't conflict with our business, but there are often times where the exclusive product becomes the foothold for them in the market, because all of a sudden you're in a regional chain which has good, of course, coverage across that certain geographic area. You get customers familiar with it, and that gives you the springboard to move through the traditional model once customers are familiar with the product.
I'll ask you one more then.
Sure.
How are you going to the suppliers? Like, you have a need, you've identified it. You can't just always wait that, okay, there is a gap in this section or category. How do you go out and scout out for the best supplier partnership?
That's a good question. I think that there's a couple ways that we go about it. A lot of time what we'll do is we'll look at what's successful in other markets that's just not distributed in Alaska. We say, hey, this is a great product that's doing great numbers in this other market, but that supplier, that producer, really isn't ready to make that jump, whether that to be Alaska or the Pacific Northwest or even the West Coast sometimes. And we find those suppliers that are having that success and give them that easy option where they don't have to do any work other than filling out freight information, and all of a sudden they're selling product in another market without all the entanglements that a distributor relationship comes with.
Just on that, like, what data do you read? Like Hot Brands Market Watch report, or what kind of things are you looking at to see, okay, this brand is doing great and it's not in my state?
Yeah, for sure. That's definitely part of it. I've actually made some great relationships here at this show where I've found some great suppliers that we continue to work with year over year. The other thing that I just do is I'll often look at a variety of ratings, and I'll find some product that is getting great reviews at a price point that we like, and then reach out directly to that winery or directly to that distillery to make that connection.
Anyone? Any takers? Yep, Patrick?
It can be all over. Of course, the traditional model runs the gamut. The clearance model, though, can run the gamut as well, right? So recently, I bought a couple pallets of high-end Napa Cabernet through clearance that usually ran around $95 at cellar door, that I was able to get for a fraction of that, right? Other times you're looking at the lower end of things where you're trying to get something at, say, as low as $2 a bottle if the supplier is motivated enough. The same thing with all of it, private label, control label. With private label and control label, you're going to want some sort of volume, of course, to make the supplier happy. For them to be producing this, they need a certain volume where it makes sense for them. So for the private label and control label, generally we're looking at things at $35 and under, where we can move the necessary volume for it to make sense for the producer.
On that more, it would be you will have, let's say, Yellowtail Shiraz, and then you would want $1 less for your private label, right? Like you will have a benchmark category, and then you will just be around it with more margins.
Yeah, for sure. And for private label, control label, it's definitely we're looking at something. Can we make more money and offer a compelling reason for the consumer to buy this product over the national brand. And then for exclusive label and those exclusive, it's just really that combination of quality and price that is going to make it, again, a compelling offer for the consumer, where they feel, even though I'm making a little bit more money, they feel that they've brought something home that is worth what they paid for it, and so they come back and make that second purchase, which is the most important thing in this business. It's not, again, that initial one, but it's to be able to build those brands in our stores, and so they come back for a second and third and fifth time.
Clearing distributors, and do you prefer to negotiate price through the distributor or FOB price?
Kind of two parts. How do I choose the clearance distributor, and then how do I negotiate the price? For the clearance distributor, we definitely have preferred ones that have been shown to be very, very reliable for us, and we'll actually let them take a little bit of a larger margin compared to working with others that charge a smaller pass-through margin if they're more reliable. For example, I worked with a distributor that offered me fantastic pass-through margin, but then I would get calls from the wineries saying that they were over 30-day terms from this distributor not paying them. And I don't want to ruin that relationship between me and that supplier, so I'd much rather go with the distributor that has a little bit of a higher pass-through, but I know is going to pay them on time, that I know is going to get the product in a timely manner and be easy to work with. As far as negotiating the pricing, I find that the distributors usually are pretty set on those pass-through rates, and so it's the FOB with the supplier that can be better negotiated.
I think those kind of clearance rates are usually dollars a case, not margins, right? Like $10 a case, irrespective of the cost of the wine.
In our market, it's margin. So our landed cost is FOB plus freight plus excise tax for the state, and then the distributor takes a margin percentage on top of that, and that's our landed cost.
Good to know. One more question, was it? Yep.
Would it come, not necessarily this, but I think we really mirror the rest of the U.S. market in that NA is huge, organic is continuing to grow for us. Well-made kosher wines are something that we're seeing people gravitate to. Ones that have no sulfites added, we're seeing more and more demand for those. And really what I see overall is a desire for authenticity from the consumers. I think consumers are getting a little bit more savvy and able to determine, hey, is this a manufactured brand, or is this something that has some connection to a real place or real people? So it's a challenge, I think, for private label and control label that I think is surmountable and can be done to create a little bit more authenticity and have that connection to a real place when they make those wines.
Hello, quick question here. So time, which I think is very important in our industry, especially for producers, and then for the import companies. What time of the year are you looking for O&D to place your orders? And maybe you can share a successful story of a O&D product, such as a Christmas type of wine that you were presented here and then it worked out.
We usually work about 3 months out, and that's for a product that's already been produced, right? If we were doing a private label, that time frame would be longer. But from talking to a supplier that already has a product made, whether it be a control label, something we're considering for exclusive, we usually look for about a 3-month time frame. For an O&D example specifically, I don't have a good example of that, but one of the folks that I met here, one of the suppliers I met here that was really successful for us was Latitude Brands, who does a great job on the East Coast, didn't have any representation on the West Coast at all. We're able to work with Latitude Brands, bring in a lot of those 90-plus seller things, wines that do very, very well on the East Coast. We've brought them in exclusively to Alaska, and they're one of our top-selling brands there. And that was a pretty quick process of about 2 months between having the conversation here and having the wines on our loading dock.